For most of human history, desire was private. It lived in the body, in imagination, in ritual, in relationships, and in silence. It wasn't optimized, tracked, or distributed. Desire wasn't something you could scale. It was something you learned to live with, struggle with, channel, or discipline. That changed when technology made desire visible, measurable, and endlessly repeatable. The moment desire could be delivered on demand, it stopped being a personal force and became an economic resource. The porn industry didn't create lust. It created infrastructure around it. Infrastructure that turned arousal into a product, attention into revenue, and repetition into habit. Once desire entered the market, it obeyed market logic. Faster delivery beat slower intimacy. Novelty beat familiarity. Convenience beat effort. Over time, desire stopped being something men experienced and started being something extracted from them. This is where semen retention enters the picture, not as a moral doctrine, but as a counterforce. It exists because something fundamental shifted when desire became a business. When sexual stimulation became frictionless, constant, and anonymous, male sexual energy stopped circulating naturally and started leaking continuously. The result wasn't liberation, it was quiet depletion. Pornography thrives on a simple neurological fact. Novelty spikes, dopamine. The brain doesn't distinguish between a real sexual opportunity and a digital simulation if the stimulus is strong enough. Each click promises something new. Each new image resets anticipation. Over time, the brain learns that relief, excitement, and escape are one tap away. No courtship, no vulnerability, no risk, no consequence. From a biological standpoint, this is an unprecedented environment. In that environment, ejaculation becomes automatic rather than intentional. Release is no longer an outcome of connection or choice. It's a reflex triggered by stimulus. Semen retention interrupts that reflex. It forces a pause where none existed before, and that pause is disruptive, not just personally, but structurally. Systems built on compulsive consumption don't like friction. The porn industry benefits from predictability. A user who feels slightly empty, slightly restless, slightly bored is a reliable user. Porn becomes a pressure valve for emotions that were never processed. Stress, loneliness, frustration, and lack of purpose, all funneled into the same outlet. The industry doesn't cause these states, but it monetizes the response to them. Over time, men forget what desire feels like when it isn't immediately discharged. Semen retention reverses this conditioning by doing something deceptively simple. It refuses immediate relief. When sexual energy isn't released on cue, it has to go somewhere. And when it doesn't go into a screen, it starts surfacing elsewhere in the psyche. This is why many men report increased restlessness in the early stages. That restlessness isn't new. It was always there. Porn just kept it sedated. Historically, cultures that emphasized discipline around sexuality weren't anti-pleasure. They understood cost. They understood that sexual energy fuels more than reproduction. It fuels ambition, aggression, creativity, and resilience. When that energy is constantly drained without purpose, the system weakens, not catastrophically, but subtly. Motivation dulls, attention fragments. Drive loses direction. The porn industry reframes desire as limitless and consequence-free, but the nervous system disagrees. Every spike has a come-down. Every shortcut trains impatience. When novelty becomes the baseline, reality feels underwhelming. This is why long-term consumers often report boredom with real intimacy, even when they crave connection. Their desire hasn't disappeared. It's been trained to respond to artificial patterns. This is also the point where many men begin questioning what's happening beneath the surface. If you're listening to this and you're already thinking about stepping out of this cycle, this is a good moment to say this. There's a community of men having these conversations in real time. If you want deeper discussions, practical frameworks, and unfiltered insights, join the Telegram channel linked in the description. It's where this conversation continues beyond the video, without algorithms shaping what you see. Back to the bigger picture. Semen retention isn't about hoarding or fear. It's about regulation. A man who can sit with desire without immediately acting on it gains leverage over his internal world. That leverage shows up everywhere else. Work becomes easier to focus on. Physical training feels more purposeful. Social interactions feel less charged and more grounded. Not because attraction disappears, but because it stops being compulsive. From an economic perspective, this is dangerous to industries built on impulse. A regulated nervous system doesn't chase novelty as aggressively. It doesn't click as it doesn't stay hooked as long. Multiply that across enough individuals, and engagement drops. This is why semen retention is often dismissed as pseudoscience, or framed as repression. Not because it doesn't work, but because it disrupts consumption patterns. There's also a power dynamic at play. Control over desire shapes behavior. A man who can't regulate sexual impulse is easier to distract and easier to pacify. Again, this doesn't require a conspiracy. It's an emergent property of systems that reward attention extraction. Pornography is simply the most efficient expression of that logic. When men practice semen retention, many experience a recalibration of desire. What once felt urgent starts to feel manageable. Attraction becomes directional rather than overwhelming. The mind clears not because urges vanish, but because they stop dominating decisions. This clarity can be uncomfortable. Emotions long buried under stimulation resurface. Irritability, sadness, and anxiety often appear. These aren't side effects. They're signals. Porn often functions as emotional avoidance. Remove it, and the unresolved material comes forward. Semen retention doesn't solve these issues automatically. It forces confrontation, and confrontation is uncomfortable, but it's also where growth begins. This is why retention is often framed as hard. Not because abstaining is difficult, but because awareness is. The porn industry escalates because it has to. When novelty wears off, intensity increases. When intensity normalizes, extremes appear. This isn't a moral judgment, it's how tolerance works. Semen retention breaks this escalation by reducing exposure. Less exposure means less tolerance. Less tolerance means desire can reattach to reality instead of fantasy. Over time, men who detach from constant stimulation often report improved confidence. Not the loud kind, but the quiet kind that comes from self. They know they can feel desire without being controlled by it. That internal stability changes how they move through the world. Conversations shift. Eye contact changes. Ambition feels cleaner. None of this requires rejecting sexuality or intimacy. The issue was never sex. The issue was outsourcing desire to an industry optimized for extraction. Semen retention restores ownership. It gives men the ability to choose when release happens and why. Choice is the real currency here. In a world where everything competes for your attention, sexual discipline becomes strategic. It protects energy. It sharpens focus. It restores depth. The porn industry profits when desire is automatic. Semen retention thrives when desire is conscious. Desire became a business because it could. Semen retention exists because not everything that can be monetized should be surrendered. This isn't about purity or guilt. It's about direction. And in the end, the question isn't whether desire is natural. It's who gets to decide what happens to it.